Independence Day resurgence is terrible. Happy 4th of July, everybody. This is Tracer83, and today I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about my Glock 34 Generation 4, which some of you may know from my last video I bought as a temporary or possibly long-term replacement for the P320. I've gotten the P320 back from the factory, but while it was gone and while I was waiting to send it off, I started shooting my Glock 19, also Gen 4, in USPSA and IDPA. And this is just what I was carrying. It's what I've had for a long time. I kind of got used to this and decided I wanted a full-size Glock to shoot in the interim. So I finally found the Glock 34, the Generation 4. I prefer the Generation 4 mostly because it has the bigger magazine release, which is really helpful for me. It took a while. It wasn't until we had a special sale or a Glock day at my local shop that I finally found it. And this happens to be the M.O.S model, which I'm not going to review it as the M.O.S model. So the one that has the option of putting a slide ride red dot on the top. I'm not going to review it in that capacity because I haven't shot it that way yet. I haven't even taken the plate off, but it is an option. I figured I'd go ahead and buy the M.O.S in case I want to play around in carry optics division at USPSA or just play around with a red dot. So I'm going to give you sort of my impressions of the pistol, how it's run for me, and primarily the modifications that I've made to it since I started shooting it. All right, I'll start out by talking about the modifications that I made to the gun and why I made each of them. I'll preempt that by saying I've never actually shot this gun in a completely stock configuration, and that's because as soon as I bought it, I put several aftermarket parts on order, and I didn't even take it to the range until they were installed. The first thing I purchased was a set of Dawson Precision sights, which I also have on my P320. They're great. They're kind of an industry standard, I think. The front sight is a fiber optic with a narrow blade, and then the back is metal flat black with serrations in the back. This really helps tracking your sight, especially out where you've got good sunlight, tracking your sight up and down as you're shooting multiple shots. The next thing I did was put in a Storm Lake aftermarket barrel that's stainless. I do this to all of my Glocks because I shoot primarily reloads. I shoot some lead, a lot of coated bullets, jacketed, everything, and Glock doesn't recommend that you shoot reloads in general through their barrels. I know some people do, but to be on the safe side, with an unsupported chamber and the polygonal rifling on the standard barrels, I put an aftermarket one in all my Glocks. They don't necessarily have to be Storm Lake. I've had Lone Wolf before. This just happened to be what was available at the time. Then after that, or along with that, because they all kind of came in the mail at the same time, I put a Bob Vogel competition trigger in here. And you can't really see the difference, but the main difference between this and a stock trigger is all the internal components are highly polished. That's the trigger bar and the safety plunger on the inside of the slide. It also comes with 3 separate striker springs of different weights, a 4 pound, 4.5 pound, and 5 pound. And then kind of most important for me was the over travel set screw that comes in the rear housing. So if you want to adjust how much over travel you have, you can just with a small Allen wrench go in there and turn it half, a quarter turn, and it'll adjust your over travel. So I've got that where I like it, and I think I've got the trigger down to about 4 pounds average pull weight with a Lyman trigger gauge. That doesn't seem that light. In fact, the pistol is advertised to come at, I think, 4.5 pounds out of the box, but this trigger is a lot smoother and a little bit lighter. You can get it lighter by putting in different striker springs, but as I'll talk about in a minute, I chose to go with the heavier one. The next thing I did was, I'll go ahead and take the slide off for this. I went to the Glock store and got a 13-pound tungsten guide rod and spring, captured spring. This is the Gen 3 model of the spring, which I ordered accidentally, which required me then after that to get one of these little adapters. It's just a little collet that goes at the end of the slide here in a sort of bushing slot. You put it in there and then put the guide rod back in as you normally would on a Gen 3. This helps weight, controls recoil really well, and 13 pounds seems to be about the right impulse for the ammunition that I shoot. Next thing I did was put in an aftermarket, well actually not aftermarket technically I guess, a factory extended mag release. This is only 1/10 of an inch longer than the stock mag release. You can hardly tell the difference. In fact, yeah, if you didn't tell me that this was the extended one, I wouldn't have any idea. Anyway, I put that in there, and that really helps me with my usual problem of getting to the mag release, even turning the gun in my hand, especially with the steeper angle on the Glock frame. It takes extra effort for me to get to the mag release on a stock Glock. So this helps out a lot, and it's probably one of the more important upgrades that I made given my sensibilities. And then lastly, or I think second to last, I stippled the grip like I do on most of my pistols. The way I did this and the way I stipple my grips is I'll make the little indentations like pretty much everybody does, but then I'll go back over it with the soldering iron and just rough it up and make sort of a checkered texture to it. That breaks up the pattern and creates all these little divots and points, which really makes it a lot more abrasive. And then the last thing I did was put in this grip plug. It's partly a cosmetic thing and also helps getting the mag in and out a little bit easier. It's harder to get it hung up on this empty space in the back. Let me just say that the first match I shot with this gun was an absolute disaster. I took it down to the Yuma charity match a couple of months ago, which is a 10-stage match, and it's the biggest match I've ever shot. It's the only one I've ever shot that took place over a couple of days. And that's because I shoot lots of local matches and haven't gotten out to any of the major ones. This was a big local match that's an annual event. Anyway, I had light primer strikes on at least half of my stages, and on a couple stages it happened more than once. God damn it. So I took it over to the safe area. I took the 4.5-pound striker spring that I put in here from the Bob Vogel trigger system. I took it out, put the 5-pound in, which is the heaviest one that it comes with. I could have put the factory spring back in here, but I wanted to just try the 5 because I think the factory spring is 5.5 pounds if I'm correct. Anyway, I put the 5-pound back in, and it seemed to be alleviating the issue, although I noticed I did still have problems with the slide going all the way back into battery. And unbeknownst to me at the time, that can also cause a light primer strike, because if you ride your thumb up on the slide so tightly that you're interfering with the motion of the slide, then it can put the round in such a position that you can still engage the striker, or you can still release the striker, and the striker will go forward, hit the primer, but won't hit it solidly, and in fact will hit it off center. And I verified this by looking at a few old cases that I've got lying around. So that was still kind of an issue. I've worked through that, but the big solution I have found, for the sake of just covering all my bases, is keep the 5-pound striker spring in here. Don't mess with the 4.5 or the 4-pound. I've been told that if you use a lighter striker or if you use a certain brand of primer, it shouldn't be an issue, but I really don't want to have to mess with using one type of component over another just to get my gun to work reliably. Also, I did put I think it was from the Glock store, a titanium skeletonized striker in here, which has a longer striker surface or striker point to it, which should create more contact, more positive contact with the primer, and should move faster because it's skeletonized. That didn't really seem to affect whether or not I had a light primer strike or not, because it happened a few times in practice after that as well, going back and forth between the different springs, just kind of experimenting. And also I found that at least the brand of skeletonized striker that I used, again, I think it was from the Glock store, it sort of made for a more rigid trigger pull because the shoe, I'll just call it a shoe because I'm not sure what it's called, the shoe of the striker that hangs down and engages the sear, it's a little bit longer and more rigid. So I may play around with that a little bit more in the future with different springs just to see if I can get it tuned down a little bit lighter, the trigger that is, without affecting its functionality. For the time being, I'm just going to leave the 5-pound in here and just go with the Bob Vogel trigger as it is. Unload for it. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Range is clear.
And that's how it's done.
2627.
2627.
Nice,
Thank you. Next, I'll talk about its shootability and how it works as a competition gun. It's a very popular pistol, especially in IDPA, which is more stock gun oriented, even in ESP division. It's still sort of based around stock production guns. It's also very popular in USPSA, though it's not quite as popular because there are so many divisions and there's sort of a more, I guess, diverse audience of people shooting. But I like it quite a bit. I like Glocks a lot, even though I don't shoot them as much as I did when I first started shooting. The first gun I ever bought was a Glock 19, but I've kind of migrated away from Glocks since I started shooting the P320, just because I wanted to stick with one competition gun. As I started getting used to the Glock again, and especially the 34, I'm reminded of the things that I like about Glocks. I like the grip angle on a Glock. It's just something you got to get used to. It helps me keep my wrists locked over center a little bit more positively. I also like the fact that I don't know if it's entirely the grip angle that contributes to this or what, but I found it pretty easy to get fast reloading. The downside to the Glock when it comes to reloading is, as I've mentioned in other videos, it's a polymer magazine going into a polymer frame, which if the frame is not clean, if the magazine's not clean, it's really easy for the magazine to get stuck. They don't eject nearly as well as in some other pistols, and there are times, more often for me, that I've had to strip the magazine out rather than watch it fall freely. One of the best things about Glocks, besides the fact that they're relatively inexpensive, is that there is just a world of aftermarket parts for them. It's easy to get them worked on, to get modified. It's easy to swap out whatever kind of parts you want based on your tastes. And very little of this gun internally is actually original, as I've already kind of gone through. And it was really easy for me to do that. Another thing is, besides being easy to find parts for, they're easy to work on. Before I started tinkering with this gun, I hadn't really done much to a Glock. I'd only field stripped it and cleaned it and that sort of thing, but I never took any of the pins out or messed with the firing mechanism. Well, you can take the Glock completely down. It doesn't really matter what model it is. You can take it completely down and detail clean it, or swap out parts with just removing a few pins, a few punch pins. And once you get the internal mechanisms apart, and I'm not encouraging anybody to do this that doesn't feel confident in doing it, but once you get everything apart, it's also not something that's going to take you an hour to put back together. You can put pretty much any part of this gun back together, no matter how far down you strip it. You can get it all back together in just a couple of minutes. So that's a great thing about the Glocks. Now, having said all that and admitting that I really like the pistol, I will still go back to the P320 as my competition gun, and I already have. In fact, I like the Glock just fine again, but I find that it's a little bit harder for me to run the trigger as quickly, even though the trigger is lighter on this gun than on my stock P320, which again, I haven't made any modifications to the trigger on that gun yet. It's still a little bit harder for me to be fast on the trigger. I think that's partly the angle that the pad of my finger reaches the trigger shoe on here, and also it's a little bit spongier of a break on the Glocks, because I've also noticed that if you're trying to stick with externally stock parts on a Glock trigger, if you just change out some of the internal mechanisms, you'll get a lighter trigger, but it's hard to get it more crisp than it already is. In fact, a heavier stock trigger seems to be a little bit more crisp than one that's had work on it. That's just me. I have limited experience playing with Glock triggers and shooting other people's Glocks with modified triggers, but the stiffer, crisper break on the P320 is something that helps me out, I think.
Good move. I shot too much over here. I hit the steel and didn't get it. They should have kept on moving. Oh, you steel on that one. So, did you leave that one steel and not shoot that one? Hold me not.
I'll go ahead and wrap this up by making a recommendation. If you're looking for a pistol to get into the action shooting sports with, or if you've already got a pistol and you want something that's just going to be a little bit more competitive, this is a great option. It gives you the flexibility to shoot in multiple divisions and in multiple disciplines. Also, like we saw, it's highly customizable and upgradable. Incidentally, you don't have to change out the entire trigger group like I did to get a better trigger than the factory trigger. The connector is the part that has the single biggest influence on trigger pull weight. After that, you can do things like upgrade the safety plunger that'll take a couple more ounces off, and you can incrementally step down your trigger pull weight. Believe it or not, the trigger return spring is not what really influences your trigger pull weight, and I just bring that up because I was under that impression for a long time. But really, it's the connector. So check it out. Also, I didn't mention when I was talking about the Dawson Precision sights, this does come with the standard Glock sights, the cheap plastic construction ones. It does come with an adjustable rear sight, but I mean, really, I don't like the way those look. I don't like how my eye sort of reacts to them. They'll be fine if that's what you got, but this is a really important upgrade for me, and I recommend you do the same at some point. There you have it, guys. My thoughts and impressions on the Glock 34 Generation 4 as a competition pistol. As always, I hope you found this video informative or at least entertaining. Make sure you click that subscribe button, like and share with your friends. Happy 4th of July, and until next time, keep your eye on that front sight.